It's the 3rd of July and it's cold. It's cold in this Nairobi, Kenya. Sasa, Cyrus and Joanne felt very generous today. And then they told me, why are you asking what we want from you when we're just gifting you and your family? Poleni, poleni. African mom is me is like, unataka nini? This uji, it's uji power from Hajeri. I've had it before. Highly recommend. It's a gift for me today. I love it. So, asante sana to the team for bringing it. Tomorrow is going to be the 7th of July. It's the 35th anniversary of the Saba Saba rally. Now, it also made me think about my own transition into what I would call my radicalism. But let's get into it. The other day, somebody said to me, hey, Janet, siku hizi umekuwa activist. It was actually a few days ago, and I'm like, okay, what's your point? And they said, yeah, you're just very vocal. It's, you know, you're out there. But the way they were saying it didn't come from a place of admiration. It almost came from a place of concern. I asked them, do you love the Kenya we live in? Because if you do, I'm actually really happy for you. I think there's some people who are living in a bubble. And sometimes I'm like, please let me borrow your bubble for a bit, just to know what it feels like to be in Kenya. And you're like, everything is working. Everything is fine. I have access to everything I need. I would love to do that. So I asked them, okay, Kosawa, you're okay with the country we live in? They said, no, see, Ivo. But you could tell basically they were alluding to, you've become extra nowadays. And it got me thinking about the word radical. Let me explain why. June 25th, 2024, like many people, forever changed me. And I want to mention a little bit about that story of how it changed me. I know that the protest and the conversation started the week before. I've mentioned before I was at the coast doing an event, and when I came back, I knew I was going to take to the streets on the 25th. I don't think any of us knew that would turn into this day that became what it became. Beautiful, but tragic. And so when I took to the streets and everything that happened thereafter, something in me fundamentally shifted, not low-key, to a point where I was restless for a few months. I was angry, I was confused. I wasn't the same Janet. I was refusing to associate with things that I had otherwise been doing. And I kept trying to figure out, what does that mean? And it's only recently that I realized I've been radicalized. And then I like to do a deep dive. When I find out something, when I put a name to something, I do homework. I go and research, I call experts. So I've spoken to legal experts, I've spoken to political scientists, just to be like, walk me through what this thing I'm feeling is. First, let's go to the definition of radical before we even get in. According to the dictionary, it says, relating to or affecting the fundamental nature of something, advocating or based on thorough or complete political or social change. But here's what's really interesting about the definition of the word radical. It's actually grasping something at the root. Radical comes from the Latin term radix, which means root. So radical means rooted, right? It's just that it has a very negative connotation. Radicalization, extremism, we've heard about them. If you had told Janet a long time ago, one day you'll be radical, I would have been like, Shindwe, when mtumbaya. How can you say I'll be radical? Because that's what was shown on the news and in different places, these radical groups. Now, please, disclaimer, radicalization can be dangerous. It also means an extreme way that you see something. We've seen what extremists do, whether it's religious extremists, we've seen what they do, whatever religion it is. Radicalization can be very harmful. You take a group of young people and you radicalize them with an ideology which is harmful, which is about death to others, to self, you know, all of that. But I never took time to explore radicalization in a positive way, because explain to me how I've become more rooted for the love in my country and more rooted in my faith. Those are the two ways I've been radicalized. And it's taken me a year to realize, because I've not been able to have conversations the same way. In a way, it kind of affects friendships, because I feel like I can only really be in spaces, not where we're always talking about the agitation for change, not where we're always saying, leo tunapanga maandamano gani, not necessarily that. I just don't know. I don't know how to be okay with somebody who's okay with things the way they are. Does that make sense? Like what are we talking about? People who are disassociating from everything that's happening in the country, people who feel like it's not really affecting them. I have no hard feelings about them, Like everybody deserves to feel what they feel, and everybody deserves to go through their journey. Maybe these people are being radicalized slowly in a good way, I don't know. But as it stands, it's so hard for me to connect in that way. And that's why I'm saying it's an extreme. So I'm rooted. Radical action is about going back to the roots. And if the roots are rotten, corruption or betrayal or brutality, then radicalism becomes valid. But let's talk about when it's valid, and then talk a little bit about when it can also be reckless. Valid examples of how radicalism shifted, I would say, the discourse of a country. The Soweto uprising in 1976. I've talked about this before. It's actually what birthed the Day of the African Child. In 1976, there was a group of high school students in South Africa who were opposing them being forced to speak Afrikaans, which was at the time, the language of the oppressor. And they protested, thousands of them, and unfortunately, some of them were killed. And there's that iconic picture of Hector Peterson being held by his friend with the sister running alongside him, his lifeless body in one of his friend's arms. That picture marked the beginning of a shift in the anti-apartheid movement in South Africa. So it was radical action from these students, and it fundamentally shifted how the international community started pushing back against apartheid. That's one. And I think I'll use that example as I also go into what we've seen from Saba Saba rally to the Gen Z protests. So let's go back to 1990, right? How did we get here? 1990 in Kenya, that's exactly what happened. So what was the backdrop? It was a one-party dictatorship. There was rising dissent. People were really frustrated with that one-party state. And so on the 7th of July, thousands gathered at Kamkunji grounds, and they demanded multi-party democracy. They really paved the way for the constitution that we enjoy today. The response was violent. Sound familiar? We'll come to 2024 just now. 20 people were killed. 1,000 people were jailed, and leaders were detained, including Matiba and Orengo. It was radical courage, but how did it change the discourse of this nation? What happened after Saba Saba? So the repeal of Section 2A of the Kenyan Constitution in 1991 ended the one-party rule by reintroducing multi-party democracy, marking a turning point in the country's political history. So it wasn't for nothing, because several years later, you would see more agitation, perhaps nothing at the scale of Saba Saba, not until the Gen Z-led protests, but it led to a lot of discourse, a lot of agitation, and eventually we had the referendum that led to the birthing of the Constitution and the promulgation in 2010 in Kenya. So those are the seeds of the Saba Saba rally that talked about how it started and what it led to. Many people know this story. I might just be reiterating the obvious, but I just want to draw a little bit of a thread, if you will, a path. Then we had June 25th, 2024. Again, I started this video by saying it fundamentally shifted me, but it also fundamentally shifted a lot of people. So what is it that fundamentally changed in the radicalism and the radical acts of courage? Remember, Saba Saba rally, Kamkunji grounds, fists up, calls, and a call for change. By the way, these were in decades when you could not even whisper at police brutality, we have to have multi-party. You couldn't say it. But this time it was said out loud, and that's what broke the glass wide open. Many years later, the descendants of Saba Saba, I keep saying, the people who led and at the front lines of this revolution, descendants of Saba Saba, descendants of Mau Mau. It is what it is. These are people of courage. Our young people are people of courage. But now, it's with smartphones and with bottles of water and with Kenyan flags. So it's a digital revolution. And I think that's, to date, I wonder sometimes if the president is just sitting there thinking, Maze, flags alafu masimu alafu chants. And they've literally rocked Kenya and rocked the world. But that's what it is. It's a digital revolution with really smart people who are radical in their love for Kenya. That's what's different. The thing about radicalism is the rooting. I've talked about it. So people are rooted in the love they have for this country, that they want to do whatever it takes to hold true to it, which means the Constitution. I don't know if in 10 years from now, 20 years, we'll probably have an influx of lawyers in this country. Kila mtu amerudi kusoma katiba, because our government has swayed so far away from the Constitution that our only hope is bringing it right back and putting it at the center of everything we're talking about. Right? It mattered because it wasn't just about tax. It was about betrayal, survival, and dignity. The state response: tear gas, killings, abductions, and over 60 lives lost. This was in 2024. Remember, in 2025, we're now looking at 16 plus people killed. The parallel is that the same repression that was there in 1990, but it was met with new tools, including live streams, TikTok, and digital resistance. Both radical acts, the tools are different. Saba Saba, Gen Z protests. So, what was once whispered became broadcast nationwide. And I think what I love about what we're seeing is people are no longer whispering. Because when you whisper something in silence, you make the silence the truth. But the truth is, we have to say it out loud. Our system is broken. Our system is broken. You know, when you say it out loud enough to say, we need to fix the system, or we need to break and rebuild the system. I mentioned it earlier. Radicalism, when is it reckless? It's reckless when it's fueled by destruction, by darkness and death. It's not healthy when it's not rooted in love and goodness and a push for better. So we basically have to hold on to healthy radicalism. We have to have enough radical faith in this country, not to destroy it, but to demand better from it. That's what we have to keep in mind. And I think that's what can help you discern between healthy radicalism and reckless radicalism, which is more towards we destroy everything and we center our feelings and emotions, some which might be on the extreme nature of dangerous. If you make that the driving force, then you've killed radical love. You've instead made radicalism reckless. We cannot let that happen. So we have to stick to what we are seeing, except for the infiltrations, which I've talked about. Radical love is what pushes us for more. Unhealthy radicalism includes violence, rage without reflection, chaos that doesn't have clarity, but instead we should be looking at values-driven radicalism, which is focused, civic courage, which has legislative aims, and they have to be grounded in truth, memory, and accountability. Basically, everything that we're being forced to reckon with is everything that we have to avoid. Because what I keep seeing a lot of Kenyans going back to is, no matter how many times you try to justify abductions and state terror, you're lying to me because the Constitution allows me to protest peacefully. The Constitution allows me to report if I am a victim of police brutality. But instead, the state, I believe, and many believe, is veering further and further away from that. So if you want to be a healthy radical, root yourself in values, in faith, and in the Constitution. That's where it starts, because it means you're rooted in the love of the Constitution, the love for your country, and the love for others. Because again, we also can't move away. And sometimes you'll hear me making references to biblical faith. I know I have an audience that's very diverse, but I often say the Bible itself gives you examples, so many examples of radical people of faith who are pushing for better for their people. Start with Jesus. Don't go far. Jesus was radical because he believed in love of everyone and he believed in the condemnation of evil, right? I think people see the Bible and hear faith, and I'm still trying to understand it better, as also an extreme which makes them uncomfortable. The more I'm reading it, and trust me, I still have a lot to learn, but the more I'm reading these examples of Moses going up to Pharaoh's face and saying, "Let my people go," the more I'm looking at Nehemiah, the more I'm looking at even the people who surrounded Moses, like his wife Zipporah. I'm like, these were all radicals. And people might not understand, okay, but he says that it's a burning bush that told him to go, and that's spiritual. And we don't need to get too deep into it, because if you are of faith, then you see them as critical symbols of faith and moments in history that brought us to where we are. But we need to stop hiding behind the Bible and stop hiding behind religion and weaponizing religion. The more you weaponize religion, the more you invalidate what faith has also done to people. I was laughing because I was telling Joanne and Cyrus, you know, this government has me so stressed, I went back to, I'm like, I can't backslide anymore. I'm like, I became double saved. Imagine somebody pushing you so far, you're like, watch on your koketena, because what is happening? So it's been interesting to see those parallels between people of faith also being activists because they want better for people, and pushing back and protesting. So please don't hide behind your Bible. How do we move from protest to policy? In my last video, which thank you guys, by the way, for the engagement on that. I think a lot of your comments were incredibly insightful. I need to start filing them somewhere, because I feel like a lot of you bring helpful insights into the conversations we have. We have to learn the Constitution. So learn your rights, learn the power of those rights. We've already talked about that. We have to organize. And what does that look like? It looks like joining civic education forums, youth voter networks, budget scrutiny groups. People like, there's a few. Maybe I'll mention them below. Actually, I will mention them below. We have to act. Now, this one about calling your MP or pushing for legislation or fundraising for legal defense. I know calling your MP, people are like, nimpigeni mwambie nini? Really? I get it, but it's okay. Call them, send a letter. Some of the guests we've had on Fixing the Nation have said some interesting things. There's an MP who said, it's okay, call them so that you can say you called them. Write that letter so that you can say you petitioned and wrote a letter. So that when they go out there in a rally and start trying to say, mimi nimefanya, mimi nimejenga, you're like, no, you haven't actually done that. Call them out and document it and say, there was a rally where you said you've built schools, you've done nothing of the sort, which I don't even think that's the job of an MP. It's a whole other different conversation. But hold them to account and document and say, this is the petition, this is the document I signed. The other thing that somebody we spoke to the other day, Cyprian Nyamwamu, I'm going to try and run the clip and try and edit it down because he talked about how, over the last decades, they've organized into 3 tiers of people. He called it a tripartite alliance, civil society groups, religious, and gender parity. And he's saying we need to organize again because he said part of the organizing of those groups back in the 90s, which he was a part of, is what also led to pushing for the constitution we enjoy today.
The Tripartite Alliance includes the civil society, the citizens groups, including the academia, on the one hand. Then we have the religious, and then we have the political opposition and political parties, as it were. If we can agree to meet in Limuru next week, as the people of Kenya, because we have a right to do so, and I choose Limuru because it is an historic place since 1966, as we now know, that is the only political thing that we ought to do today. That day, you will realize that actually President Ruto has only been in office because we have allowed him to. He has no legitimacy to govern. He has no legitimacy to govern. This is the simple thing that we have been saying. Parliament knows it no longer represents the people of Kenya in any way. That's why even when 93% of us say withdraw that bill, they go on and pass it anyway.
So when you hear the word organize, listen to the people who are saying it in faith and rooted in the Constitution. And then we need to protect. We need to defend civic spaces. We need to defend and protect artists, journalists, and peaceful protesters. That's what we need to do. Something unfortunate is beginning to happen, but that's part of what happens when people do divide and conquer, is people are already beginning to get nervous about the word protest. People are already beginning to say, do we really need these protests? Like you can see all the harm they've caused. People are already beginning to say protesters are not peaceful. They're actually doing vandalism and carrying out vandalism. By the way, guys, as part of a revolution, this has to happen. It's so sad. You start to break apart. So how are we defending each other to separate the person who's doing vandalism from the person who's doing peaceful protest? That's what we need to do. We have this habit of boxing everyone together, and it's lazy and it's tedious. So the harder work is separating. And I keep saying sometimes I feel like the government of Kenya is lazy in their approach to how they're governing. Because you can't go out there and say, we're going to arrest 700 protesters without saying, we can understand that a lot of them were peaceful, but another group were very violent. Okay, your job is to separate the peaceful from the violent. It is work. It's tedious. Ni kazi mingi sana, but that's why you're in office. Basi. So that's why. And also, I don't have your training. Your trained eye is supposed to be able to tell you that guy is looting, but that guy is holding a bottle. He's with whoever the lady next to him is, his sister, his girlfriend, whatever, and they're just walking. So I'm asking us to do the tedious, untidy work of defending while also condemning those who are misrepresenting and invalidating the movement. So that's how I wanted to talk about the word radical, a word that can be very polarizing, a word that can make people nervous. It's okay, that's fair enough because of how it's been politicized or weaponized. But let's root it, let's reframe how we understand it, and let's just talk about healthy radicalism, because radical change needs radical memory, radical truth, and radical action. So even as we're marking the next Saba Saba, which should be coming out tomorrow from the day I'm filming this video, let's not just make it a memory, let's continue the movement, because that's the movement that I think in many ways has brought us to the next movement, which now young people led in 2024, which I believe is the movement that will birth us into a new Kenya. It's just going to take a bit of time, but it's going to take radical action. And so just as I started this video, what do you say when your friends are like, eh, siku hizi umekuwa, nowadays you're... Maybe have that dialogue with them and say, what do you mean when you say that? And does it make you uncomfortable? And if you choose not to have the conversation, it's okay. Injustices radicalize people, but it's often for the better, not for the worse. It's official with Janet Mbugua. Let me know what you're thinking and feeling, and how perhaps you've begun to look at the word radical differently. And let's remember, beyond memory, this is about movement.